Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? All right, great. Welcome to breakout session 2105, Simplifying OS Deployment with Windows Provisioning. My name is Mark Shepard, and I'm on the R&D team that builds Windows Provisioning. And so definitely enjoy talking to you today about it and getting your feedback. Clicker. Oh, there we go. Little delay. So goals for today. First, we're going to learn how. Is the screen on? Great. So first, we're going to learn about how Windows Configuration Designer works. We call Windows Configuration Designer WCD or WICD. We affectionately refer to it as Wicked internally, so I'm going to use the word Wicked going forward. And Windows Provisioning can simplify OS deployments. We're going to talk a little bit about what's new in Anniversary Update. And finally, we'll talk about the current limitations of the product as well as the product roadmap, so you get an idea of what's coming and can give us feedback. I got maybe 30, 35 minutes worth of material, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So for the agenda, first a quick broad overview of Wicked and Windows Provisioning. Then we'll talk about, we'll walk through a few common use cases and scenarios and a little bit of do's and don'ts for each of them. Next, we'll talk about some advanced topics. Well, advanced for a 200 level class. I mean, for the Q&A session, we can go into much more depth as needed. And then finally, the product roadmap and limitations and what we're going to be building next. So let's start off by talking about what people use for provisioning today, which is imaging. That's the standard. That's what everybody does. You get a new laptop from an OEM, and what do? You promptly replace the image with a custom image. And that's costly and it's complex. First of all, you have to use the imaging tools to build up your custom image library. Secondly, you have to actually manage a set of drivers. The image that you got from the OEM came with the right drivers, but since you're replacing the image, you got to figure out all the right drivers to put on it yet again, right? And across a large fleet of devices, that can be fairly complicated. The next problem is just network bandwidth. Rolling out these large multi-gigabyte images to a lot of PCs can be a problem, especially if you have branch offices with narrow bandwidth. Some people get around this by buying from the OEM with a custom image pre-installed, but then typically that'll cost 10 to 15 bucks a device extra. And of course, it's a desktop-only solution, whereas Windows-powered devices apply to a more broad spectrum of devices. But this is the state of where things are today. So the goal of Wicked provisioning is, instead of just wiping and reloading a whole new image, why not build up the deltas from what the OEM gives you in the first place? So we want to move to a world in which the OEM's image, they put the image on, and it's the right drivers, and IT provisions. So just expressing the deltas of what they need. And that's the direction and the roadmap we're going. And the way Wicked and Windows Provisioning works is you start off by running a wizard, simple authoring tool that lets you express the deltas you want. What apps do I want installed? What settings? How do I want to enroll into a management tool, et cetera? Then you apply that provisioning pack to a set of devices when the devices are first booted. And after the provisioning pack is installed, the devices are ready. They're at the login screen, ready to hand out to users. And in this example, I'm showing applying the provisioning pack with a USB stick. So I author the provisioning pack, I put it on a USB stick, I apply it to a bunch of PCs. We have a broader set of options than that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And finally, this is technology that works across all Windows-powered devices, not just PCs, but also phone, HoloLens, Surface Hub, et cetera. So what can be provisioned? There's actually a very broad set of things that can be provisioned in a provisioning pack. But the question is really what should be provisioned. And the best practice is to provision really just the minimum amount of stuff that you need in order to get managed. Because the sooner you get managed from a management tool like SCCM or just Active Directory and Group Policy or Windows Intune or a third-party tool, the better, because when you're managed from a tool, not only can you provision the policies and the apps that you want on the device, but you can see the compliance of the device against those policies, and you can change them over time, right? Whereas provisioning is a sort of a static one-time operation. And so it's really better to control as much as possible from the management tool. And also controlling from the management tool and doing as little as possible at provisioning time means that there won't be any conflict between the two where you're setting different policies in two different places. So that's the best practice. And I want to mention that Wicked is just one of a suite of tools that we're providing in Windows 10 as an alternative to imaging. Pre-Windows 10, if you wanted to do an OS upgrade, it was always a wipe and reload and migrate process. With Windows 10, we now support in-place upgrades. If you wanted to re-provision a device to hand out to a new employee, that was also a re-image process. Now we have push-button reset. And for the initial imaging and provisioning, it was just wipe and put a new image on, and now we have Wicked provisioning. So it's just one of a suite of things we're doing to enable IT to move beyond imaging. That being said, we understand imaging is an important workflow in everybody's environment, and that's what people do today, so imaging is still fully supported. And imaging still makes sense in a lot of large deployment scenarios that we'll talk about a little bit later. All right, let's do some walkthroughs. So first thing, to install Wicked, you have to download and install the Windows Adaptation and Deployment Toolkit. So you go to the web, you search for ADK, download it, install it, and Wicked is one of the configuration options. So new to Windows 10 is you can now install, or new to Anniversary Update version of the ADK, you can now install Wicked standalone without all the imaging tools. It used to be a multi-gigabyte install. Now it's just a few dozen megabytes if you install Wicked standalone. All right, so let me just give you a very quick demo of using Wicked. So I've already downloaded and installed the ADK. I'm not going to walk you through that part. And here is Wicked. And one of the things that we've added in Anniversary Update, it used to be we just had these advanced settings. And the advanced settings are, I'll show you that in a little bit. But one of the things that we've added is these simple provisioning wizards to enable some very simple flows with an easier to use user experience. And one of the wizards is called Simple Provisioning, and it's just about bulk enrolling into Active Directory. So I could create a new project called AD domain join, and we'll set it up. And this is really, really easy to use. So the idea is these are a minimum set of properties you might need to get your device enrolled into Active Directory. So first of all, what's your machine name? If you're in Active Directory, all machines have to have a unique name. A lot of people like to name the machines in some meaningful way that might have like the branch office or the company name as a prefix, but you also need them to be unique. So we add the ability for you to do something like, rand 5 to add a 5-digit random number at the end to differentiate. When you buy a retail device, it comes with a Pro license from the OEM. A lot of people want to upgrade to a volume license, so you can put the volume license key here. It's optional. The next is the network. I could put a network profile in the provisioning pack to enable the device as it boots up to connect to the network in order to domain join. It's pretty typical, though, that people don't use a Wi-Fi network profile at boot time for domain join. And the reason why is there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem, which is the Wi-Fi networks that can connect to the domain controllers are typically locked down by certificates, but you don't get the right certificate to join until after your domain joined, so it's a bootstrap issue. So most people today get around that just by plugging in an Ethernet. So, but if you had a network that enabled and password, you could put that in here as well. Then if you want to enroll into Active Directory, you'd specify the directory name that you want to enroll in. You'd specify the user on whose behalf you want to do the AAD join. Generally speaking, best practices, this is not a real user. This would be a fake user. So you would create a pseudo user called like, bulk domain join fake user. And you'd put this low rights user in Active Directory, give them no permissions whatsoever, but the permission to domain join. And then you'd put in the password for them. The reason we have this optional piece here is when you run provisioning, implicitly in this, this simple wizard sets a flag that tells, we call this thing UBI, that first run wizard in Windows when it first boots up. We implicitly set a flag that skips UBI because nobody wants to go through every single screen, right? You want to provision quickly. So one of the things UBI does, though, is it makes that first user a local admin, so you always have at least one local admin on the device. When you domain join, of course, a lot of times you want the final experience to be there's no local admin on the device, right? It's domain admins who have admin rights to the box, and the end users just log in as regular users. But since if for some reason the provisioning pack fails at UBI time, maybe you've changed the password of this low rights user, then you're left with no local admin and you wind up having to reimage. So one technique you could use to work around that is you could create a temp admin local administrator. And then this way, when the provisioning pack runs, it creates this local admin account for troubleshooting in case something goes wrong. And then with group policy, you can basically just deploy a script that automatically deletes that temporary user. You don't have to. It's an optional. And then finally, you build the provisioning pack, and it gets put in an output directory, which you can then just copy to a USB stick and install, etc. And we'll talk a little bit more about deployment in a bit. Another option is we have this thing called advanced provisioning. So this is the old UI for those who are familiar with Wicked and have used it in the past. So it's a more complicated UI, but you can do a lot more with it. And so when you start that out, it'll ask you what edition of Windows, what SKU of Windows do you want to create this for? So I'm going to create it for desktop. It's best to actually pick an explicit one rather than taking all editions, because if you take all editions, it gives you only things that are common to every brand of Windows. So since if I'm doing it for desktop, I'll pick one that's specific to desktop. But as you can see, we also support mobile, we support IoT Core, HoloLens, and Team Edition is the Surface Hub, if you've seen those big screens. And so there's a ton of things you can do here, and I'm not going to walk through all of them because it's a short session, although I'm happy to talk to any of you guys about it afterwards. But I just want to highlight a few of the more interesting ones. One is called workplace enrollments. And the workplace enrollment allows you, so we just walked through domain join. What if instead of domain join, you want to go to modern management and you want to do MDM enrollment, bulk MDM enrollment? So you can use this for bulk MDM enrollment to configure which MDM endpoint you want to enroll in. Now, if you're using SCCM and Intune, the hybrid, you don't actually need to use this. The SCCM console has a wizard that'll guide you through the process of creating a provisioning pack specific to that instance of SCCM and Intune. And you can just take that and apply it without using this wizard. But if you want to enroll in a third-party MDM, they all support, we've tried all the major MDMs and it all works. So, some of them use certificate-based, some use name password-based, so you talk to the MDM to find out how to do it. The next one that I wanted to point out is called provisioning commands. So provisioning commands is something that we added in 1511, threshold 2. And that's sort of like, we added it originally to install Win32 apps, but it's really a very, very powerful way of doing anything that's not supported in-box with Wicked and Windows provisioning. So at the heart of it is there's these things called command files and command line. So for command files, you can just add any set of files you want. So in this case, just as a trivial example, I created a VB script called hello that just says hello world, that's it. But in general, you could add a whole bunch of XEs, you could add a bunch of MSIs, you could add some MSITs for transforming the MSIs, you could add some VB scripts that set registry keys, you could do whatever you want. And then it has one command line. So in this case, I'm just gonna write wscript hello.vbs, because it's just a simple one. But in general, that script that I'm invoking, it could turn around and it could then install a whole bunch of the XEs and the MSIs in sequence to do a much more complex install. Right? So that's, oh, did I not forget? Always got to remember to add the file there. So the last one I just wanted to mention was that for those of you who were in the session we had on Tuesday on provisioning EDU devices, the one cool thing that we added, and I'm not going to talk about this in any depth here because we covered it in that session, was we added this new thing called shared PC mode. So shared PC mode is a configuration of Windows that supports multiple users logging in a stateless manner. So users log in, but they can't save data to the local file system. They always save it to the cloud or removable media. And so it's great for like EDU shared cart devices, but it has applications for point of sales devices and other applications as well. So it can be used more broadly. So after I've saved my file, I can just say export the provisioning pack, create it, and now built my provisioning pack. So anyway, that's an example of how you build a provisioning pack with customizations. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. So a few things to note about enrollment options. One is there's domain join. We talked about that. You want to use a low rights sudo AD user for doing the domain join. And we recommend you create a temp admin account just in case something goes wrong. The second is MDM enrollment. This allows you to do bulk enrollment to modern management. The way you do it is specific to the MDM that you're enrolling in. For SCCM or SCCM Intune Hybrid, you use the SCCM console. Intune standalone doesn't currently support bulk enrollment, but this is something that the Intune team is working on. So we're collaborating, and hopefully it will come sooner rather than later. And for other MDMs, you check, find out what their method is. There is a limit to MDM bulk enrollment in this way, though, which is that it's really for single user devices. If you want to have different users log in and have different policies apply, MDM protocol doesn't support that unless the device is AAD joined. Right now, you can't AAD join in bulk. And this isn't a limitation of just Windows provisioning. This is even in imaging workflows, you can't do AAD join in bulk. And this is something on the top of our queue, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the current limitations in the roadmap. A number of people also, often it's installing some apps or some certs becomes important during provisioning time. And the recommendation is keep the apps and certs minimum, right? Minimum to bootstrap, and then you control the rest from the management tool. Sometimes you need to put some certs in place in order for the management tool to trust that you're good to enroll. And sometimes you want to put some apps in because they're agents that you need or malware software that you want to have right from the get-go. So have that minimum set of apps and the minimum set of certs, and you can put them in as well through the advanced UI. There are some limitations to, and then the provisioning commands, that's your get-out-of-jail-free card, and it lets you put in all your Win32 apps as well as any other advanced customization you want. Be aware that the out-of-box experience, that first run wizard does have a 30-minute timeout, so don't go too nuts with it. And also, when you add files to the provisioning command, it has some performance problems when you add a large number of files. So the best practice is if you have a multi-file installer, where it's an exe and it's a directory of stuff, cab it up before you add it to provisioning commands, and then have your script uncab it. And then the other really important thing is make sure that your master install script has logging in for troubleshooting if you are orchestrating some very complex set of installation instructions. All right, let's take a look at some simple deployment options. So when last we were here, we had just created this provisioning pack that did something brilliant. It brought up Hello World, right, which is what everybody's first provisioning pack should do. So let's take a look at the output location of that file. And there's the provisioning pack. So I'm just going to double click on it. That's the simplest way to install. And it says, do you trust the provisioning pack? Yes, I do. And there's Hello World. Woo, Excitement City. And one of the things is, and that's always what you want to do when you first create your provisioning pack. You want to double click and install. You don't, because the UBI cycle is much more complicated, so it's good to start with a double click, make sure it all worked. We have a settings page, and we've added a bunch of diagnostics here in the anniversary update. So if you go to settings, access school or work, and then add or remove provisioning packs, you can see all the provisioning packs that are installed. So you see this advanced UI one that we just installed a few moments ago shows up here. And if you look in the details, it'll tell you if there were any problems. It'll give you a very high-level summary if there are any problems. And if there are, it'll give you, if there's not enough information to troubleshoot, it'll take you to documentation on how to grab advanced logs so you can figure out more detail what's gone wrong. So that was something that we added. So that's a simple deployment. What are the other deployment options? So that's the first thing you want to do. You always want to start interactively. You want to test. You want to troubleshoot. Make sure you got it right. Then if you have a small deployment, like you're in several dozen devices, even several hundred devices, what you could then do is take the provisioning pack, copy it to a USB stick, and you can put it on the devices one at a time. What you do is when Windows boots up, if you insert a USB stick that has a single provisioning pack on, that'll now orchestrate this little dialog that says, do you want to install a provisioning pack? And then you just say yes, and then it goes and it does the provisioning and it skips the rest of UBI. So it's just a few clicks to do it, and you don't have to go through all the UBI complexity. But before Anniversary Update, you had to tap the Windows key 5 times to invoke the wizard, and you can still do that. And this works great for, like I said, a few dozen devices up through a few hundred. But what if you have a few thousand devices or tens of thousands of devices? Or some school districts that I've talked to, they deploy hundreds of thousands of devices over the course of a summer. In that case, you're not going to want to stick a USB in every device, right? And unfortunately, one of the limitations we have right now is that provisioning packs can't be scripted. We can't automate the installation of them yet. That's another one of the roadmap features we're going to talk about. So if you want to deploy it to a large scale, you really want to put the provisioning pack in the image. So if you want to, for example, roll out a bunch of shared PC mode devices, you would write a provisioning pack to create that, and then you would put it in the image using DISM and then use standard imaging techniques. And of course, we want to get away from the need for imaging. So this isn't where our final state, but this is where things are now. So just set expectation. On mobile, we have a number of additional deployment options. You could put the provisioning pack on one device, and then you can use NFC Tap and Share to install the provisioning pack on other devices. And that can be done either at UBI time or post-UBI when you're doing your initial testing. If you have an industry-based mobile device, then you can provision from a barcode scanner as well if the device has an integrated barcode scanner. So you can actually encode your provisioning pack in a series of barcodes and then have it scan them. Finally, you can drag and drop from a tethered PC. So if you have a USB connection to the device, you can just connect it to your desktop, and then on your desktop, you open it up. You'll see it as a file system, right, a file storage device, and you just drag the provisioning pack to the device, and the device will pick it up and start running it. So those are some additional options on mobile. Talk about a few advanced topics. Again, advanced for a 200 level. So question is, when does the provisioning engine run? What's the actual sequence? Well, it runs before UBI time for any provisioning packs that are in the image itself. Then, if you interactively add, by sticking in a USB stick or tapping on Windows 5 times, those are the interactive UBIs. That comes next. And it can actually run in 2 stages. It tries to run as many of the settings as it can. And then some of the settings may say, I require a reboot. Then we can do 1 restart, and then it'll try to run whatever settings didn't run previously. So right now, it just handles 1 restart. We're working on overcoming that limit. And then finally, if there were any things that failed, we'll retry at the idle time after the first user login. And so that's the stuff at the very beginning. And then, of course, you can also install interactively at any time. And we have a retry logic. If there are failures, we retry 2 minutes, 15 minutes, et cetera, and then the first few restarts afterwards. And we only redo the parts of the provisioning pack that failed. So you can have a large number of settings, and that's all we do. Device reset. What happens if you reset your device? Well, when you reset your device, there's 2 options. One is you can say, remove everything, and the other is you can say, save my files. So if you say, save my files, then the provisioning packs get saved, and then when the device goes through reset, the provisioning packs are rerun. If you say, remove my files, well, then all the interactively installed provisioning packs get removed, but the embedded provisioning packs, the ones that are installed via DISM, they're still there, so just those would be rerun on device reset. Next is, don't use deployment assets. So you didn't see deployment assets in the version of ICD that I was using, and that's because I installed ICD standalone without the imaging tools. ICD, though, is part of the ADK, and it has a bunch of imaging tools. And before Anniversary Update, you always had to install it with the imaging tools. So if you install it with the imaging tools, you'll see these deployment assets. Don't use them. They're going away. The deployment assets are not actually used by Windows provisioning. It's actually just a wrapper for the OS build. They're statically provisioned assets that just go into the OS build. You can't double-click. You can't install them through any of the techniques we just talked about. They're only OS build time. Now we're moving to a world where ICD is purely a post-imaging tool for post-imaging customization. So having these here made no sense to us. And there are the imaging tools that provide the exact same functionality in a simpler way. So having it in 2 places just caused confusion. So please don't use them. They're going away. And as I mentioned earlier, troubleshooting, the settings page is your one-stop shop for troubleshooting. You can see whether the provisioning packs succeeded or failed. One warning, though, there are a couple of settings that are what we call asynchronous. So MDM enrollment and that provisioning commands CSP, those are both asynchronous. So the provisioning pack just launches them and doesn't actually know if it succeeded. So it'll think it succeeded even if this says it's OK. It may or may not have succeeded. So you actually have to observe side effects today. But that's, again, something we're going to address in a future release. So let's talk a little bit about the roadmap and the product limitations. So first, a brief review of the history. In 1506, sometimes called Threshold 1, or the first version of Windows 10, we did the initial release of Wicked and provisioning. And the big feedback we got is, well, this is all well and good. I can do some certs, I can do some modern apps, but what about my Win32 apps? What about all the stuff that I might need to do? And so that's when we added the provisioning commands. And then in Redstone 1, or the 1607, the release that just came out, this is where we decoupled it from the imaging tools within the ADK, so at least you can install it standalone. And so now it's a smaller install. We added the simple provisioning wizard for bulk domain join. And even though it's just limited functionality for the simple wizard today, this is something we're going to be investing in very heavily going forward, because the simple UI lets us do a lot more type checking and making sure that everything is done properly. There's no chance of messing it up. And so that's an investment area going forward. And we improved the documentation and the diagnostics. Beyond 1607, I think I mentioned earlier that we're going to be focusing exclusively on the non-imaging scenarios. This is how you provision as a delta on top of an image. And some of the requests we've heard, I can't say this is coming in the next OS release or not, but these are sort of top of our mind. One is bulk AAD join, and not just for the ICD scenario, but we want to enable it in imaging scenarios as well by virtue of provisioning packs. We want to, a number of people have said they want to make sure that we can remove OEM pre-installs, but keep the drivers. So we're working on technology for that. The technology for removing OEM pre-installs, though, is pretty heavy-handed. It actually is built on top of push-button reset, so it's like a 20-minute extra process of grinding. So it's always better to start with a clean image or a signature image, and we've been working with the OEMs to make sure that there are more clean images available, and the percent of clean images available, signature images available from OEMs has gone up significantly over the last few years, but we've still heard, no matter how much it's gone up, I still have some that aren't clean, and if I can't start with a known state, then expressing a delta doesn't really help me because I'm still in an unknown state, so please give me this ability. The next is PowerShell commandlets for scripting. So this will let one automate installation of provisioning packs instead of bringing up that trust dialog that says, are you sure this is a trusted source? Right now you have to click yes. People want to be able to install it silently. And if you can install it silently, then the provisioning packs can be used not only in their own right, but as part of a MDT task sequence or other kind of scripting environment. Also, why should we be carried in the ADK? Maybe we should just make Wicked a store app that you can install as a Centennial app. That would make it much easier to discover, deploy, and service. Right? The ADK, the servicing model is you got to go update it yourself. Simplified app installation. I showed you what the provisioning commands look like. That's fairly complicated. You can be very powerful, but it's fairly complicated to get it right. And that was only for XEs and Win32 apps. What about modern apps? Well, we actually have a separate CSP for that. Maybe we should make that simpler. And that's a common request we've heard. And then finally, media-free provisioning options. So why should I use a USB? Maybe I should have barcodes or PXE Boot the ability of the provisioning packs without media. So for next steps, try installing Wicked from the Windows 10 ADK, build some provisioning packs. We've got lots of instructions here. How many of you are Windows Insiders? Awesome. That's great. So if you are a Windows Insider, then I would say you're probably going to start seeing some of these roadmap features sooner rather than later. So look for them as they come out. After the session's over, please give us feedback. That's it. All right, so we have 10 minutes left. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you recommend this as a way of replacing imaging altogether for laptops out of box?
Yeah.
Okay. And it can handle as far as like installing Office and all that as well?
It can handle installing Office. We've got the 30-minute limitation. If you want to deploy, so the question is, can this replace imaging altogether? And it can replace imaging well for small-scale deployments. If you want to deploy very large scale, it's
Right.
not quite suitable today. And imaging does have its place. Like if you have a whole bunch of apps you want to install, you fire up a VM, you install the apps, you sysprep it, then you deploy it. Now you don't have the overhead of all of those MSIs installing. So I mean, imaging still has a role.
When you're handling the resets for those, and you said keep my files, does that keep the user documents as well as the PPKG
If you say keep
file?
my files, it keeps all your documents, so including the PPKGs.
Okay, so like for example, we would still need SCCM OSD for re-imaging. We would just use provisioning for the initial out-of-box experience, basically.
Today, yes.
Okay.
One of the things we want to do for the re-imaging scenario that we don't quite support yet is in a future release, we'd like to enable it so that SCCM can, to provide a CSP so SCCM can enumerate all the provisioning packs that are on the device, and then remove the ones that it doesn't need, add the new one, and then just do a remote push button reset that resets the device, and then the provisioning pack runs to automatically re-enroll. So that's sort of how we think about the media-free re-provisioning scenario. So, not there yet, but that's on the roadmap.
My only other question was, when you were adding applications through the provisioning commands, does that get encapsulated into the PPKG? So if you have like a 10 gig Office installation, does that make the package file basically 10 gigs?
Yeah. So
Okay.
if you have 10 gigs worth of apps and you want to put them and you want to do them at provisioning time, you would have to put them in the provisioning pack, and that would make the provisioning pack 10 gigs. Again, the more stuff you can offload to the management tool, the better, because this way, as you version the apps or change them over time, you don't have the stale provisioning pack, but you can do them at provisioning time as well. And a lot of people have said that they want that because it'll save network bandwidth. This way they don't have to download it to all the devices. So yep, both options. Just remember, if it's a large number of files, cab them to one install. Yep.
Two questions. I like the concept. Let's say your disk fails and you put a new disk in. What happens?
If the disk fails, you will need to re-image at that point.
How do you see that being solved strategically? As in getting away from corporate imaging?
I think that one is one that will live on. I don't have an answer for that right now.
Second question. When you assign the machine name, can you query the BIOS and generate the machine name based on a property in the BIOS?
Can you generate? So, the question: Can you generate a machine name based on the property of the BIOS? Right now, the only property we can read from the BIOS is the serial number. So that's the %serial macro. Actually, does a query to the BIOS to find out what the serial number is and puts that in there. That's desktop only. The RAND is wildcard is for other things. We could look at other BIOS properties. Are there?
We rely on you to expose that rather than the ability to do a
Yeah,
query.
so we would need to do that. We need to have some kind of macro, because you want it to be, right now it's like there's a static machine name and we have two wildcards, which is random and serial for desktop. I'm hearing maybe we should have some macro that expands to an arbitrary BIOS query.
Yeah, just wondering. Yeah.
Okay, is there particular BIOS fields that are interesting to you?
Well, the idea is that the vendor would populate with something that's unique or fitting our standards, so it allows assignment of corporate names easily.
That's great feedback. I'll take it to the product team, which is me.
Thanks.
Thanks. Oh, that's good. What? Yeah. BIOS is old, yep.
We just have a script naming it. We use like IP address ranges to determine like what city they're in.
That's a good feedback. So the feedback from the since he wasn't on mic was, could we just have a script that would run to name it? It's a good feedback. I like that idea. I mean, it's only software, but I have to take it to the dev team. We prioritize, but that's good.
How about a computer name prompt so it can be entered manually?
Computer name prompt. Okay.
Is that available now, or
No, that's something we could put on the roadmap. We're trying to move to the point where you don't have to do anything interactively on each device.
Right.
We want to make it so that the device, you do all the interactive stuff ahead of time when you create the provisioning pack, and then the rest gets automated. So sort of the idea of prompting per device seems a little contrary to really streamlining the process.
Okay.
Is that something you really want, or is it just like an idea?
It just goes off of different type of computer names. We have our computer names include the username in the computer name. So there's
so
a
username.
Prefix, a username, and then a number.
I see.
So we actually.
Yeah,
have to
thanks
do
for
it manually.
clarifying the use case. Thank you.
Cool.
You the same? Okay.
No,
You know, we're looking at a different kind of a technology for the case in which the end user provisions their own device, and that may be a more natural fit. You know, where the end user is sort of walking through a very customized and cloud-guided Ubi experience, and that may be a better fit for what you guys are talking about. But hit me up. You got.
Horrible mess when you have username and any other name. We go with what you guys suggest, and we say this is the site, this is what it is, an AT or a AD, desktop, tablet, whatever, and then the serial number after. Because you can always find the serial number, whereas where you may even have if you're a user, put that in SSM.
Yeah. I like the idea of a script because it's flexible. I like the idea of named UFI variables because that's also flexible. The per user customization feels to me like it's a different path, but let's chat a little bit more offline. And if you guys ever want to send me email, you know, feel free. You guys have my email address. Yep.
instead of creating a new temporary local admin, can you enable the admin that's already there? That's usually disabled, right? By
Yeah,
OEMs?
that's a possibility. What we really want to do, and what we're working towards, is the idea is instead of having these asynchronous CSPs where we don't know what the result is, we want to plumb in the infrastructure so we know whether every one of these settings failed or succeeded, and if any of them, if they all succeed, then we just go through, and you're at the login screen. You don't need any remediation. If any of them failed, then we'd like to just give you a remediation option right then at Ubi time to let you know it's failed. If we do that, you don't need to create this temporary admin thing. So
You know,
I want to get away
but
from that.
I want an ad. I mean, we have a local admin account.
Oh, you want a local admin account?
I want a local admin account.
Really?
Yeah.
On all the devices, even though it's unmanaged? Like, how do you change
Well,
the
it
passwords?
will be managed. I mean,
What?
it will be managed. We may be changing passwords with LAPS, the Microsoft tool for changing local admin passwords. But we want a local admin
Okay.
account, and we changed the name of the account with group policy, but I want to be able to enable that account
I see.
automatically.
Good.
Is that possible now or not? No?
I'm not sure if you can change the password of the existing built-in admin account. I'm not sure. If you shoot me an email, I'll follow up offline and find out for you.
One more quick question. Do you envision this, you mentioned earlier about how OEMs, they will do some imaging work at the factory. Do you envision, a time where we send a provisioning package to an OEM?
Yeah, that is actually one of the scenarios that we really feel is a high value add for provisioning. Is right now the negotiation between IT and OEM is a full image,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And that just takes a long time.
Yeah.
And it's just much simpler to be able for IT to be able to say, here's the provisioning pack OEM, please give me the white glove image with this provisioning pack installed. It's a much simpler conversation. It's easier to troubleshoot. It scales across a large number of devices. And it also gives the OEM who's doing the white glove provisioning more flexibility, because they could say, well, if it's a small order, maybe I'm just going to install it manually with a USB stick. But if it's a large order, maybe they, sysprep and, invoke their own imaging flow, right?
Are they working on this now? I mean, are you working with the OEMs?
We are.
If I go to my OEM, you think they'll?
It'll,
Dell.
yeah.
Okay, can't help you there. Well, no, I can help.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
So when you're talking about the application of the provisioning packs, you only covered the desktop and the mobile scenarios. When it was initially released for Wicked and Windows 10 IoT Core, the scenarios were fairly limited. What's now supported today on applying those provisioning packs for Windows 10 IoT Core?
Yeah, we're just about to switch to
For IoT Core, it's a fairly limited set of things that you can provision. And again, the same. Are there things that are missing? The specific ones that
Well,
you'd like
for
to see?
example, if you're looking at IoT scenarios for deploying things into an environment, it might be useful to have the same NFC type provisioning models for a technician. So I guess my question is, what is the plan or what is the strategy around the provisioning scenarios for Windows 10 IoT Core? And then how do you then, do that not only in scale, but then also through, human intervention, whether or not that's through the USB, whether or not that's through USB
Yeah.
sticks, whether or not that's through NFC and so forth.
Well, all these provisioning techniques are available for IoT Core. IoT Core is the team that actually pioneered the barcode scanner as a means of provisioning. So they also support removable media. So we do have a fairly rich set. In fact, one of the IoT Core dev leads is now our dev lead. So we have actually a very deep connection to the IoT Core team. So it is top of mind. If you have very specific feedback on like a new provisioning technique you need or a new setting you need, please
So
shoot me an email.
Yeah, I just wanted to get the clarification because when Windows 10 IoT Core was initially released,
Yep.
it was fairly limited, but it sounds like it's now becoming more comprehensive.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
Okay. I guess my main question is provisioning device in SCCM. How is that done? How do you set that up? And what version of SCCM are you using it?
You need so provisioning with SCCM.
Yeah.
You can generate the provisioning pack, I believe, with SCCM 2012.
Okay.
And stick around a little bit. I can show you there's a couple of really good web articles